In Cub Scouts, we were doing the Pinwood Derby. I worked really hard on my car. My dad helped, of course. I had already won the first 3 rounds, and before the final round, one of the dads of the other kids picked up my car to hand it to me. It slipped out of his hand and broke the wheels when it hit the floor. I'm convinced it was not an accident, and he was sabotaging my car so his kid would win. These was over 30 years ago, and I'm still salty about it. I was feeling sick one day in grade 3 or 4, and the substitute teacher wouldn't let me go to the nurse's office because I didn't look sick enough. I had strep throat. I was in middle school at a friend's sleepover. Her parents were very strict. Her siblings got pulled out of public school to go to a Catholic school, were homeschooled in high school, and they scared the hell out of me. Anyway, it was probably like 11 men at this sleepover, and her mom hesitantly let us watch the Disney movies Enon, Girl of the 21st Century. I laughed at a part, and even though her parents were awake, they came into the living room to scold me for being too loud. Not long after, I took a drink of water, got a little strangled, and started coughing. They called my parents after 11 men to come pick me up because I couldn't behave. They had no regard for them being asleep and having jobs to get to early in the morning. They wanted me out for laughing and coughing in the span of about 10 minutes. Demi's parents never let me stay the night at her house again, and are still pissed at them for doing that almost 20 years later. When I was in like 5th grade, I didn't put a book cover on my math book. It required cutting up a paper bag, something similar. We couldn't really afford the fancy ones, and I just never did it. So my math teacher took away my math book, so I couldn't do homework or follow along in class. Like tough, who does that to a kid? When my mom found out, she went down to the school and raised hell about interfering with my right to an education or something. The school district was terrified of her until I graduated. Grounded me for leaving a hanger on the dryer, then extended it for reading, while grounded further for sleeping when told I can't read. Shit still pisses me off years later. When I was like 9 or 10, I was rollerblading home from my mom's work. Right, and I'm heading down 4th Street, and I find something like $16 on the ground, a 10, a 5, and single dust laying there on the sidewalk next to some outdoor seating at a cafe. Being the obnoxiously nice kid that I was, I pick it up and kind of look around, wondering if anybody lost their money. That's when the lady in the weird sweater vest comes around the corner. We make eye contact, and I tell her I found this money, and she goes, "Huh, let me see it." And my naive ass is like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. She's a grown-up. She can't sort this out." She looks around, hands me the single back, puts her finger to her mouth in a gesture, then she just fucks off, never to be seen again. My swimming teacher promised me a candy bar if I jumped off the board when I couldn't swim, and when I did they said they forgot, but I saw them eating one in the lounge. I was 5 and I was betrahander thing that swim teacher did instead of teach me to swim was to try and teach the group how to keep their eyes open underwater and see. We all had goggles and had to take them off to do this also. I didn't learn to swim there. I ended up learning at a hotel on vacation when my sister taught me like a year later. My swimming teacher removed my inflatable armbands while swimming in a deep part of the pool because I was not paying enough attention out of excitement. In high school, I was suspended for letting out a little toot. My grade to science teacher taught us that there is no food we eat that doesn't come from plants. He gave the example of a cow. It eats grass, so it comes from plants. He offered $5 to anyone who could find anything that people eat that didn't come from plants, and said no one had ever claimed it. We all went home and thought about it. Kids were saying things like marshmallows, ice cream, candy. I put my hand up and answered salt. He was quiet for a moment and admitted that I was correct, and no one had ever thought about that before, not even him, and that millions of people around the world eat salt every day, but he refused to give me the $5 instead to stop the mushrooms. But algae comments, an organism that feeds on decayed organic matter, or on the waste products of other organisms that feed on decayed organic matter, would still fall under the umbrella of "without plants, they wouldn't have anything to eat" rule he had set up. I didn't know about the algae, and didn't consider it a food when I was in grade 2, but I had actually thought about mushrooms, and a kid did suggest them, but I knew that even mushrooms wouldn't have food if plants didn't exist. I could have mentioned any mineral, but I mentioned only the one we regularly ate. The lesson was on the food chain, and how important plants were to our survival, that we would have nothing at all to eat if they didn't exist. You know, other than salt. We were almost out of ice cream. I made myself the last bowl. I came into the living room to eat it, and my dad took it and ate it all because I didn't offer him any. I was about 8. I'm 41, and I still hide while eating bowls of ice cream. On the wedding day of my mom's 3rd wedding, I sat in my room alone crying cause it was hard, but I made sure to remove myself cause I didn't want to upset my mom. When my aunt came to check in on and saw I was crying, she went and told my mom. My mom went out of her way to stop hair and makeup to come into my room for being selfish and trying to ruin her happy day, even though I purposefully tried to not look upset in front of her in the first place. My family had all our belongings stolen while at the beach when I was young. Inside that stuff was my favorite cap, my only cap. I remember I loved that hat and wore it every day everywhere. At that age I was at that held big time sentimental value. This woman who was with us at TH time started to antagonize me and make fun of me about how upset I was. I was like 6 or 7 because my parents lost more valuable things like a digital camera, which as an adult I can understand, but as a kid, trying to deal with this great injustice that not even my parents could make better. It was a big Delphi's woman pushed and pushed until I yelled at her to go away. Leave me alone. Typical out-of-character stuff for me. She reacted like a true Karen and made up this whole thing to my mother that I was being rude and disrespectful and was telling at her and called her names. So my mother punished me. That was like 20 years ago. No, I'm not holding a grudge. When I was young, my mom was best friends with one of the neighbors down the street, who also had a boy the same age as me. As a result, I played a lot with said boy, and was encouraged to be best friends with him. Whenever my mom wasn't around, though, his mom was a complete bitch to me. She would come out to where we were playing together and shout at me for some minor trivial thing. If we were both doing something bad, only minorly bad, we were not bad kids, she would blame it all on me and never reprimand her son at all. This was all when I was like 7-10 years old, and so I couldn't process it at all and had no idea how to react. And it really got to me. I found out years later she was basically jealous because I was doing much better at school than her son, and she wanted to take me down a peg. Ultimately, the son and I ended up going to different secondary schools and drifted apart, which meant that fortunately I stopped having to interact with her. Moms are still good friends, and she has always been pleasant to me as an adult. She even did the flowers at my wedding. But even 30 years later, I still keep her at arm's length because of how unfairly she treated me as a child. A teacher in my Catholic grade school was also the mother of one of my classmates. He was kind of a bully, so when I had a birthday party, I didn't invite him. She confronted me about it and would go out of her way to make school miserable for me. When my parents brought it up to the administration, she denied it. Now, I wasn't actually Catholic, just went there because it was a nice school, so as an actual member of the parish, she was believed over me. I ended up needing to move schools before I got to the grade that she taught. This was when I was a teenager, but for my Eagle Scout project, you had to have a proposal and get it through several levels of clearance. My proposal was very good. I was the only person in years to get through the initial level of clearance without having to revise it. Unfortunately, at the district level, there was a stick in the mud who believed that he wasn't doing his job unless he rejected every proposal at least once. He rejected mine after an hour and a half of arguing for not including ladder safety measures. So I printed out a 150-page manual on ladders and put that in front of him. Unfortunately, it was not the same guy, so I didn't get to see his face. I told the other guy what happened when he asked why the proposal was so massive. He thought it was hilarious. I had 3 levels of clearance: Scout Master, Board of Review, and then District. This happened at the district level, to be clear. When I went and told this story to other adults, they all had trouble with this guy and hated him. 30-year-old man made it a point to walk up to me and call me by a racial slur when I was about 8 years old in front of the crosswalk lady. Nobody said shit in response. The trailer park manager for the neighborhood I grew up in. When I was 7 or so, a bunch of friends and I went to one of their houses to play outside. After about 20 minutes of being out there, the manager pulled up in her car and told us we couldn't play there because that was someone's yard. Well, the parents came out and told her that, yes, we were all allowed to play in their yard and that it was fine. That wasn't enough for her because she told us all to go home anyway and got our parents to take us home when we wouldn't leave. When I was 10, an aunt told me to stop eating so much or you'll get fat like your parents and sister. I believe that was the first time I've ever wanted to clock someone. P.S. That aunt was 100 pounds heavier than either one of my parents at the time and is close to 200 pounds heavier now, while both of them have lost 75. Not being allowed to have any other food during cookouts other than a lukewarm grilled hot dog or an overdone hamburger, because apparently everything else is grown-up food. Geez, I'm glad I'm an adult now for small reasons like that. My mom asked if I wanted to play 52 card pickup while my friends were over. I asked her what it was, and she said I either want to play or I don't. I told her I didn't want to play anything if I didn't know what it was. She got visibly irritated and threw the cards on the ground and said, "This is 52 card pickup, pick them up." She then threatened to ground me as she watched me pick the cards up and put them away nicely. I think it was worse because my friends were watching. My father-in-law waited until both of my parents passed away to become a dick. Now he talks bad about me to people and smiles in my face. Only reason I know about it is because my niece and nephew pulled me to the side and let me know. I hope and pray for my sake that he never needs to move in with us when he gets older, cause that shit ain't happening. But is that petty of me? About 8 years old, over at a friend's house, family was pretty trashy, and friend and I were eating the candy we'd bought, and the mom flat out said to me, "You might be skinny now, but someday it's going to catch up to you and you'll be super fat just like me." That stuck with me forever. It was my dad. He was sleeping and apparently I made a noise when I went to take something from his room, so his sleep got disturbed and he couldn't get sleep after that. So the next morning he came and poured a whole bottle of water on my face when I was sleeping. I still don't know what the fuck he was thinking when he did that, maybe revenge or whatever, but that was such a petty and fucked up thing to do to a kid by a grown-ass adult. In middle school, I was in the hallway during class, as I was an office aide and had a free pass to be in the halls for deliveries, and I was casually kicking this pen cap that was on the floor on my way back from a delivery. This teacher comes over and berates me for a few minutes about kicking the pen cap, about how disrespectful it was, about how I had no pride in my school or keeping it clean. Mostly he just wanted to scream. I bent down very, very slowly without breaking eye contact, picked up the pen cap, then said, "I picked it up." He flew into an even bigger rage, screaming, telling me I was never going to amount to anything, demanding my hall pass. I showed him my office aide badge, and for some reason, that was the final straw. "You are an office aide. This is not the pride that an office aide should have," he screamed, emphasizing my title as if I had failed the nation. He escorted me back to the office, screaming the entire way, and parked me in front of the receptionist, who was my supervisor during office aide hours. "Tell her what you did," He say, "Do I kick the pen cap?" I said. "I mean the whole thing," he said, face red, veins popping from his forehead. "That's the only thing that happened," I said. I seemed to realize that now he was in the presence of a fellow adult and couldn't keep screaming like he had been. The tiny fraction of his personality that was capable of self-analysis and shame surged just enough to get himself under control. He muttered some things about my arable attitude and left. I never had him as a teacher. I never knew what his name was or what he taught, and only saw him once more when he came into the office at the end of the semester, spotted me, and smugly asked, "I hope your attitude has improved since the last time I saw you." I rolled my eyes and gave an insincere, "Yep, sure has. Thanks for turning my life around." He made some more hurtful comments about how I was never going to amount to anything and left. I never found out his name, but I wonder how sad his personal life must have been. How little control must you have in your life if you take a job in a middle school just so you can power trip on children? I had to walk home from the field when we lost a playoff game. My aunt was unpleasant or weird with everyone, but always particularly cold to me. One day, when I was about 14, she took me aside and said she'd held a grudge against me because of my name. She had wanted to call her first daughter that name, but my parents had had a child first and used it. They had no idea she wanted the name and aren't the kind of people who would have done it on purpose. She said she'd tried really hard and had just about forgiven me for it. I just remember being baffled by it and then feeling sorry for her for being that spiteful, to be honest, but it palled later in comparison with all the other crazy, horrible things she did to her own family. I lived in China for a year when I was 7 to Vinted and spent a good amount of time traveling and staying in hostels. One day I slept in. I was staying for free in a hostel that wasn't legally open yet, so there were no outlets to charge my phone, so no alarm, and was just barely going to make it to the station in time for my train. Bear in mind, this was a 40-hour train that only ran once a day, and I didn't have the money for a new ticket. That taxi driver got to the end of the street which the station was on and turned to me. He said, "It's 10 kwai to drop you off here. If you want me to take you to the station entrance, it's 50. I ended up paying because I needed to make that train, but I was upset and furious. I have met some of the kindest, most selfless people in China, but like anywhere in the world, there are some absolute dickheads too. Mom kicked me out when I told her she ought to stop taking the only money I could earn post-high school to buy herself drugs. Back when I was 17, I moved in with a friend for 3 months to work as an intern. That was my first time living in a dorm full of strangers in a foreign country where I knew the language. Habitualdrists started really using what I learned at school. The day I got there, I was sitting in the kitchen with my friend, just joking and our usual gimmicks. Some tenants show up and were introduced to me. A couple from Detroit were also there. I noticed the boyfriend being distant, but thought nothing of it, and there was no interaction between us whatsoever. A few weeks later, the girlfriend came up to me, told me I need to apologize to her boyfriend. I asked why. She said, because I was making fun of him the day I arrived, and he held a grudge since then. I was thinking, what the frig? I was joking with my friends hours before I even saw your fat ass entered. You 30 years old but got hurt by some girls yakking in German and giggling, and just automatically made the connection between our laughs and your weight. But shy young me went to apologize anyway and was made to listen to him lecturing me about manners. I was in school and it was Friday. We were doing afternoon arts and crafts. I was a little more colorful personality-wise as a kid, so I was chatty. My teacher yelled at me in front of everyone, "You are a real pain on Fridays," out of nowhere. I was upset and shocked. I remained quiet for the rest of the day. My dad used to make fun of my butt, saying it was fat, and he would call me Fiona the monster from Shrek.